Tonight, as you settle into your comfortable place, let's gently consider how human variation has been viewed through history. The world of anatomical curiosities is not just one of spectacle, but of personal stories unfolding. As we drift towards sleep, we'll explore these gentle histories of difference, beginning with one man whose story was as human as his feature was unique. Imagine being known for just one feature, something so ordinary yet so extraordinary that it defines your entire existence. This is the story of Thomas Wadhouse, an 18th century Englishman whose life was quietly shaped by a single anatomical feature: his remarkable nose. Not a nose that was exceptionally wide or unusually shaped, but one distinguished by its length. By some accounts, it measured nearly 8 inches from the bridge to the tip. To picture this, imagine holding your hand up to your face, spreading your thumb and fingers, and thinking of a nose that extended beyond that span. It was a feature that would have made him stand out in any crowd, and yet, like most of us, Thomas Wadhouse was far more than his most visible characteristic. We don't know much about his early life, which is perhaps fitting, because before his nose became his calling card, he was simply Thomas. Born in England sometime in the early 18th century, he lived during a period of tremendous change. The Enlightenment was reshaping how people thought about science and humanity. Cities were growing, newspapers were spreading information, and ideas about individual rights were beginning to take root. Yet, for all this progress, the world still had a deep fascination with human variation, with what was considered unusual or extraordinary in the human form. Thomas's life took a turn when he became part of a traveling exhibition. These weren't like today's entertainment spectacles, but more intimate gatherings, sometimes in coffee houses or public houses where people could come to see something out of the ordinary. He wasn't presented as a freak or a monster, but as a curiosity of nature. The language matters. Curiosity suggests wonder, not horror. It implies something to be examined with interest rather than revulsion. Thomas would have stood before small, paying audiences, perhaps speaking a little about himself, allowing people to see this feature that set him apart. We might wonder what that experience was like for him, to be the center of attention for something you had no control over. Was it a source of pride, a necessary means of making a living, a burden borne with quiet dignity? The historical record is silent on his personal feelings, but we can gently speculate. To survive and even thrive in such a role required a certain resilience. He had to navigate the line between being an object of curiosity and maintaining his own humanity. He would have developed a practiced ease, a way of meeting people's stares and questions that preserved his sense of self. What's fascinating is how he was documented. In an age before photography, his likeness was captured through mezzotint engravings. These were detailed prints, often hand-colored, that would be sold as souvenirs. If you look at these images today, and some still exist, you see a man with a kind, almost solemn expression. His clothes are simple but neat. He looks directly at the viewer. The engravers took pains to show not just the length of his nose, but the man who possessed it. In one famous print, he's shown in profile, with a measuring rule placed beside his face, a scientific touch that lent an air of legitimacy to the spectacle. The text on these prints often described him as Thomas Wadhouse, the man with the longest nose in England. His story intersects with another famous figure of the time, George Alexander Stevens, a popular satirist and lecturer. Stevens created a wildly successful show called A Lecture on Heads, where he would use papier-mâché caricature heads to poke fun at different professions and personality types. One of his most famous props was a head with an impossibly long nose, purportedly modeled on Thomas Wadhouse. This is where Thomas's reality blended with popular culture. He became a type, a shorthand for a certain kind of remarkable feature. Stevens's caricature was exaggerated for comic effect, but it kept Thomas's name and his unusual attribute in the public consciousness in a different way. We have to consider the medical reality of his condition. While no formal diagnosis exists from his time, modern physicians looking at the engravings have suggested he likely had a condition called rhinophyma, or possibly a severe form of rosacea that causes the nose to grow and thicken. It wasn't simply that his nose was long, the tissue itself was enlarged. This context is important. It reminds us that what people saw as a wondrous curiosity had a basis in physiology. It wasn't magic or myth, but a variation in human development. Understanding this helps us move from seeing Thomas as a mere spectacle to seeing him as a person living with a particular physical reality. Thomas Wadhouse died in 1780, and his passing was noted in several contemporary publications. His obituary, if we can call it that, was typically matter-of-fact for the period. It stated the basic facts of his life, and of course, mentioned his famous nose. He was buried and, like all of us, returned to the earth. But his story didn't end there. His image continued to circulate in prints, and his name was mentioned in collections of curiosities and books on remarkable people for decades afterward. So what does Thomas Wadhouse's life tell us about how people in the 18th century viewed physical differences? His experience occupies a middle ground in history. He wasn't hidden away or shunned, as might have happened in earlier, more superstitious times. Nor was he treated with the clinical detachment or pathological labeling that would become common in the 19th century. He existed in a space where wonder and commerce met. People paid to see him out of curiosity, not cruelty. They wanted to witness something that challenged their ordinary experience of the human form. Think of it like visiting a botanical garden and seeing a flower of impossible size or color. You don't fear it or think it's wrong. You marvel at nature's capacity for variation. This attitude of marveling, of paying for the privilege of seeing something rare, defined Thomas's world. It was a transactional curiosity, but one that generally stopped short of dehumanization. The very fact that his prints presented him as a calm, well-dressed individual, with his name attached, suggests an acknowledgement of his personhood alongside his unusual feature. There's a quiet lesson in Thomas's story about the relationship between our bodies and our identities. For most of us, our physical attributes are parts of a whole. But for Thomas, one feature became so prominent, so defining, that it risked becoming the entirety of how he was perceived. His challenge, one he seems to have met with quiet composure, was to live a full life within that perception. To be Thomas Wadhouse, the man, rather than just the nose. His story also reminds us how the documentation of human variation has evolved. In his time, it was through word of mouth, live exhibition, and hand-printed engravings. The process was slow, personal, and tangible. Someone had to see him in person or acquire a print to know of his existence. This created a certain kind of fame, localized, physical and dependent on direct encounter or the exchange of a material object. It was a fame bounded by the limits of geography and technology. As we leave Thomas Wadhouse in the quiet of history, his long nose now just a memory in faded ink on paper, we can appreciate him as a single point in a much larger pattern. He represents one way that societies have tried to understand the wonderful, sometimes startling diversity of the human form. He was looked at, measured, drawn, and discussed. But behind all that looking was a person, living his life, navigating a world that found him remarkable. His experience opens a window into a time when curiosity was becoming gentler, when the strange was becoming something to be examined rather than feared. And from this single remarkable life, we can begin to expand our view, to consider how anatomical curiosities have been documented and understood across different historical periods, and how our ways of looking have themselves evolved over time. If you've ever walked through a museum and seen glass cases filled with strange objects, shells from distant shores, twisted branches, or perhaps even the preserved remains of unusual animals, then you already have a sense of the world we're about to enter. But imagine a time before museums as we know them, before the neat labels and orderly galleries. Instead, picture a single large room in a wealthy nobleman's home, or perhaps in a scholar's study. It is a room stuffed to the brim, every shelf and cabinet groaning under the weight of the world's strangeness. This is the cabinet of curiosities, and it is here, in these early collections, that our story of anatomical curiosities truly begins. Long before these cabinets, however, people already sought to understand the unusual bodies among them. If you think of ancient medical knowledge as a vast, sprawling library built over centuries, then the earliest texts are like those first foundational scrolls placed carefully on a shelf. In the works of Hippocrates, in the writings of Galen, physicians of antiquity occasionally noted what they called monstrous births or prodigies. These weren't just casual observations. They were attempts to fit human variation into the philosophical and medical frameworks of the time. A child born with a visible difference might be seen as an omen, a message from the gods, or a natural, if rare, occurrence within the broader laws of nature. The interpretation shifted with the culture, but the curiosity was a constant. For much of this early history, the unusual human body was primarily a subject for text, for description in medical treatises or philosophical debates. But then came the Renaissance, a period of rediscovery and explosion of interest in the natural world. And with it came a new kind of collecting. It started, as many grand things do, with simple wonder. European explorers were returning from voyages with things Europeans had never seen. Strange plants, exotic animals, beautiful minerals. The wealthy and the learned began gathering these objects into private collections. They called them by many names: Wunderkammern in German, cabinets of wonder, or studiolo in Italian. These weren't just displays of wealth, they were attempts to contain the entire cosmos in a single room. They were microcosms, tiny models of God's creation. And what is more wondrous, more a testament to the variety of creation than the human form itself? So nestled among the nautilus shells mounted in gilt silver and the preserved birds of paradise, you might find something else. You might find a specimen jar containing a fetus with a developmental variation. You might find the carefully prepared skeleton of a person who was exceptionally tall or who had an extra rib. You might even find, as some inventories list, the hand of a giant or the tooth of a man who lived 200 years. These human remains, often called anatomical preparations, became prized pieces. They were bridges between the divine artistry of nature and the emerging science of the human body. Think of these cabinets not as morbid trophy rooms, but as the physical internet of their day. Before photography, before easy travel, this is how a person in, say, Prague, could see a narwhal tusk, a piece of coral, and the skull of someone from a distant land. The collector was a curator of knowledge, and each object was a hyperlink to a broader understanding of the world. The unusual human specimen was a hyperlink to the mysteries of life itself. Now you might wonder, where did these specimens come from? The origins are often shadowed, a reminder of the complex ethics of the time. Some came from executed criminals, their bodies donated to science or simply taken. Some came from medical dissections. Others came from distant colonies gathered by explorers or colonial physicians. There was rarely consent as we understand it today. The body was seen in many legal and social frameworks as something that could become property after death, especially if the person existed on the margins of society. This is a sobering undercurrent to the fascination, the human cost of this early curiosity. Yet, within these cabinets, a subtle shift began. While some visitors might gawk at a monster in a jar, the serious collectors and scholars began to look with different eyes. They started to compare. They would place the skull of a person from Africa next to that of a person from Europe. They would line up bones that showed similar variations. They began haltingly to categorize. The wonder was still there, but it was being funneled into a desire for system, for order. The cabinet was becoming a laboratory. One of the most famous of these collector scholars was a Dane named Ole Worm. In the 1600s, his museum in Copenhagen was legendary. He didn't just display things, he corresponded with people all over Europe, trading specimens and ideas. He published a catalogue of his collection, complete with detailed engravings. In it, among the fossils and artifacts, were human specimens. For Worm and his peers, the anomalous body was not necessarily a divine sign or a terrible mistake. It was a natural phenomenon to be documented, a piece of data in the grand puzzle of biology. This was a crucial step. It moved the unusual body from the realm of superstition and portent into the realm of natural history. This period also saw the rise of the living curiosity. While cabinets held preserved remains, the living person with a notable physical difference often found a place in the courts of royalty or the fairs of the common people. Dwarfs, giants, people with extensive skin conditions or limb differences, they were employed as court jesters, exhibited for entertainment, or sometimes kept as human pets. Their lives were a strange paradox. They were both celebrated for their uniqueness and objectified by it. They existed in a space between person and specimen. Their humanity constantly negotiated against the backdrop of awe and otherness they inspired. Their presence kept the conversation about human variation alive in the public imagination, even as the scholars in their studies tried to pin it down in their catalogues. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the cabinet of curiosities began to evolve. The haphazard wonder was giving way to a more rigorous classification. Influenced by thinkers like Carl Linnaeus, who was busy naming and ordering all of life, collectors began to sort their human specimens not just by strangeness, but by type. Bones here, preserved organs there, developmental anomalies in this case. The collection was becoming a comparative anatomy collection. The Room of Wonder was slowly transforming into the precursor of the modern Natural History Museum. This transition is delicate, like watching a butterfly still within its chrysalis. The old mindset of the wondrous omen hasn't fully disappeared. you can still feel its pull in the thrill of seeing something truly rare. But a new mindset is forming, the mindset of the scientist who looks at variation and asks not what does this mean, but how does this work, and where does this fit? So, as we leave these quiet, crowded rooms with their glass jars and dusty skeletons, we carry with us this dual legacy. From the ancient physicians to the Renaissance collectors, we see a continuous thread of human fascination with the bodies that differ from the expected pattern. It was a fascination that mixed fear, reverence, exploitation, and a genuine thirsting curiosity to comprehend the full spectrum of human existence. These cabinets, for all their flaws, were the nurseries where the systematic study of human variation was born. They held the questions that later generations would try to answer with scalpels, microscopes, and eventually the language of genetics. And as these collections grew more organized, as wonder slowly crystallized into methodology, a new age was dawning, an age of measurement, of typology, of seeking to map the very boundaries of the human form. But that is a story for another quiet moment. Let's speak gently now of that complex chapter when Anatomical Curiosities became public spectacle. That period from roughly the mid-18th to the early 20th centuries, often called the freak show era. It was a time when people with unusual bodies like Thomas Wadhouse with his remarkable whiskers, or those born with extra limbs, or unusually small or tall statures, or those with skin conditions that patterned their bodies in striking ways, were displayed in sideshows, circuses, and traveling exhibitions. This era sits uneasily in our historical memory, a tangled knot of human fascination, exploitation, and surprising personal agency. To understand it, we might imagine a long gallery, dimly lit, where society's hunger to gaze upon difference met the economic desperation and occasional empowerment of those being gazed upon. In this gallery, the sideshow performer was at once an object of wonder and an active participant in their own story. Consider a figure like Chang and Eng Bunker, the famous Siamese twins. Born in Siam in 1811, conjoined at the chest by a band of cartilage and flesh, they were discovered by a British merchant and brought to America to be exhibited. For years, they toured the United States and Europe, submitting to the probing eyes of audiences who paid to see their remarkable connection. They were medical anomalies, certainly, but they also became astute businessmen. They eventually negotiated better contracts, earned considerable wealth, purchased land in North Carolina, became slave-owning farmers, married sisters, and fathered 21 children between them. Their lives defy simple categorization as mere victims of exploitation. They navigated a world that saw them as a spectacle and carved out a space for autonomy, family, and community. Or consider Julia Pastrana, a woman from Mexico born in 1834 with a rare condition that caused excessive hair growth on her face and body, hypertrichosis, along with thickened gums and jaws. Promoted as the bear woman or the ugliest woman in the world, She was exhibited across Europe and America by her manager and eventual husband, Theodore Lent. Her story is one of profound sadness. She died in childbirth, and Lent, in a grotesque twist, had her and her infant son's bodies embalmed and continued to exhibit them for decades after her death. Here, the line between exhibition and desecration is horrifyingly thin. Yet even in this extreme case, some historians note that Pastrana was a skilled singer and dancer who performed for royalty, and that her earnings, however controlled by Lent, provided a kind of livelihood in a world with few other options for a woman who looked like she did. This duality is the central tension of the freak show. On one hand, it was an industry built upon the exploitation of human difference. Promoters crafted sensational narratives: the missing link, the human unicorn, the elephant man, that framed living people as monstrous or subhuman curiosities. They were often presented not as individuals with thoughts and feelings, but as specimens to be stared at, their humanity reduced to their most visible anatomical feature. The conditions of exhibition could be degrading, the contracts unfair, and the public's gaze unrelenting and cruel. On the other hand, for the individuals themselves, the sideshow world could represent a rare sanctuary, a community, and a means of survival. In an era with little social safety net, no disability rights, and widespread prejudice, the freak show offered a paycheck. It provided a social structure of managers, agents, and fellow performers, a kind of extended family on the margins of society. Within the caravan or the museum hall, a person with dwarfism or limb differences might find acceptance and camaraderie that was utterly absent from the normal world outside. They developed skills, told their stories, however embellished by their promoters, and exercised a degree of control over their performances. For some, it was a path to a kind of fame and financial independence that would have been otherwise impossible. Think of it like a peculiar ecosystem, a marshland that forms in a social and economic depression. The water is brackish, a mix of opportunity and indignity, but within that marsh, life adapts and finds a way to flourish. Strange and beautiful relationships form between the reeds and the birds. The performers were the reeds rooted in their difference, bending but not breaking under the weight of public scrutiny, sometimes finding in that very scrutiny the nutrients for their survival. This public fascination didn't exist in a vacuum. It ran parallel to, and often intersected with, the quieter, more clinical currents of medical and scientific curiosity. The same audiences that gasped at the lion-faced man in a tent might later read a sober medical journal article attempting to classify his condition. Physicians were frequent visitors to freak shows, not just as spectators, but as researchers. They would examine performers, take measurements, commission life casts or photographs, and seek to understand the biological origins of anatomical variation. This created another layer of complexity. The performer, as both entertainment and involuntary research subject. Joseph Merrick, known as the Elephant Man, exemplifies this intersection tragically well. His severe and progressive condition, likely Proteus syndrome, made him a sensational exhibit in a London freak museum. He was housed in the back of a shop, displayed to paying customers who came to gawk at his distorted body. But his life changed when he came to the attention of Dr. Frederick Treves, a surgeon at the London hospital. Treves arranged for Merrick to be examined by the Pathological Society of London, a scientific presentation of a living man. While Treves eventually helped rescue Merrick from his exploitative exhibitor and provided him with a permanent home at the hospital, their relationship was still fundamentally that of doctor and specimen. Merrick lived out his final years in relative comfort and dignity, yet he remained an object of study. His rooms a kind of genteel sanctuary that was also a medical observation post. This era began to wane as the 20th century progressed. Changing social attitudes, the rise of cinema as a new form of mass entertainment, and a growing medical perspective that pathologized difference all contributed to the decline of the traditional freak show. What was once public spectacle gradually retreated behind hospital doors or into the pages of medical textbooks. The gaze became professionalized, clinical, but in some ways no less objectifying. So, how do we gently hold this history? We cannot dismiss it simply as a barbaric period of exploitation, for that erases the agency, resilience, and community forged by the performers themselves. Nor can we romanticize it as a golden age of acceptance, for the indignities were real and often profound. It was, like so much of human history, a gray area, a marketplace of curiosity where human bodies were the commodity, but where the humans inside those bodies sometimes managed to negotiate, to resist, and to build lives of meaning on their own terms. They were more than their anatomy, even when the world insisted otherwise. They were entrepreneurs and artists, parents and partners, survivors navigating a landscape that offered them few other paths. Their stories remind us that the human spirit can find agency in the most constrained of circumstances, and that our fascination with physical difference is a deep and complicated thread in the tapestry of our shared history. And as the lights began to dim on the sideshow tents, a different kind of examination was taking shape in the hushed corridors of institutions, where the quest to understand variation continued in a new key. Let's turn our attention there next, to those quieter currents of study that flowed parallel to the spectacle. Imagine walking through a quiet library, but instead of books on shelves, you find body parts in jars. Instead of reading stories in ink, you study anatomy in formaldehyde. This was the world of anatomical museums and medical collections, places where science gathered human specimens to understand the machinery of our bodies. As medical understanding advanced in the 18th and 19th centuries, it brought with it a hunger for physical specimens, a desire to hold, measure, and catalogue the human form in all its variations. And this hunger would create institutions that walked a delicate line between education and exploitation. The origins of these collections are, in a way, not so different from the curiosity cabinets of wealthy gentlemen that we explored earlier. The medical school's anatomical museum was simply a more formal, more systematic version of that same impulse to gather, arrange, and study the unusual. But where curiosity cabinets were about wonder and social display, anatomical museums had a more serious purpose. They were classrooms made of flesh, laboratories where students could study what textbooks could only describe. Think of it as a three-dimensional textbook. A student learning about congenital heart defects could read descriptions in a book, but holding an actual heart preserved in a jar, seeing the chambers and valves, understanding their size and relationship, that knowledge became different. It became tangible. It became real in a way that ink on paper could never achieve. So these collections served an incredibly important educational purpose. They made the abstract concrete. They turned medical theory into physical reality. But where did these specimens come from? That's where the story becomes more complicated, more ethically tangled. The most obvious source was the anatomy room itself, bodies donated for dissection, or more often, bodies acquired through other means. Before proper anatomical gift laws existed, many medical schools relied on what were called resurrectionists or body snatchers. These were men who would dig up freshly buried corpses and sell them to medical schools. The practice was illegal, but so widespread that some cemeteries built watchtowers and hired guards to protect graves. London's famous surgeon Sir Astley Cooper once said that in his day, every professional body snatcher in London was known to him and ready to deliver a body as easily as a butcher could send a Christmas turkey. The bodies of the poor, the institutionalized and the marginalized were particularly vulnerable to this practice. If you were wealthy, your family could afford proper burial and protection. If you were poor, your grave was far more likely to be violated. And this created a terrible paradox. The very people who had the least voice, the least protection in life, became teaching tools in death. Their bodies educated future doctors, but without their consent. Beyond whole cadavers, specimens of particular anatomical interest, what we might call medical curiosities today, were in high demand. A surgeon who amputated a limb with an unusual growth might preserve it. A physician treating a patient with a rare skeletal condition might arrange for their bones to be cleaned and articulated after death. Sometimes these specimens came from willing donors who wanted to contribute to science. More often, the line was blurrier. Patients, especially those in asylums or hospitals, had little power to refuse. Their consent was assumed or never sought at all. And what about those who were exhibited during their lifetimes, people like Thomas Wadhouse? Sometimes their remains ended up in these collections too. After death, their skeletons might be cleaned, articulated, and added to a museum's holdings. Their preserved organs might find their way into a jar. Their story became a label on a specimen. Skull of man with extraordinary cranial capacity. Cardiac specimen from patient with rare valve defect. The person became a case study. The human being became a teaching example. The process of cataloging these specimens was itself an interesting exercise in how medicine understood variation. Early catalogues might describe a specimen in terms of its curiosity, monstrous, extraordinary, rare. Later, as medicine became more scientific, descriptions would focus on anatomical measurements, pathological findings, and clinical correlations. But the language always reflected the attitudes of the time. A skeleton labeled as idiot or lunatic tells us not just about the bones, but about how society viewed the person those bones once supported. Some of these collections grew to astonishing size. The Hunterian Museum in London, founded by surgeon John Hunter in the late 1700s, contained over 14,000 specimens by the time of his death. Hunter was a passionate collector, some might say obsessive. He gathered not just human specimens, but animals, fossils, and minerals too. His collection was his life's work, a physical manifestation of his belief that to understand life, you had to study its variations. But even Hunter faced ethical questions. He famously acquired the skeleton of Charles Byrne, the so-called Irish giant, against Byrne's expressed wishes to be buried at sea. Hunter bribed the men guarding the body and boiled the flesh off the bones in his own kitchen. The skeleton remains in the Hunterian Museum to this day, a constant reminder of how the pursuit of knowledge can sometimes trample individual dignity. Other institutions followed similar paths. The Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, founded in the mid-1800s, became famous for its collection of medical oddities. The Wellcome Collection in London, the Vienna Pathological Anatomical Museum. Each had their own focus, their own philosophy of collection, but all faced the same fundamental question: how do you balance the educational value of a specimen against the humanity of the person it came from? For much of the 19th century, that question wasn't asked very often. The prevailing attitude was that of scientific utilitarianism. If a specimen could teach doctors, if it could advance medicine, then its collection was justified. The ends justified the means. The potential benefit to future patients outweighed any concerns about the dignity of the deceased. And there was some truth to this argument. These collections did save lives. They helped train better surgeons. They helped identify new diseases. They made medicine less guesswork and more science. But as the 19th century turned to the 20th, perspectives began to shift. The horrors of World War I, with its mass casualties and industrial-scale death, made societies more sensitive to questions of bodily dignity. The rise of bioethics as a formal discipline began to question old assumptions. New laws were passed regulating anatomical gifts. Museums began to reconsider how they displayed human remains. Some specimens were removed from public view. Some were returned to communities for proper burial. Labels were changed to use more respectful language. The change was gradual, like a slow tide coming in. It wasn't that the educational value of these collections was dismissed, far from it. Medical schools still need anatomical specimens. Students still need to study real tissues, real bones, but the ethical framework around those specimens changed. Consent became paramount. Respect became integral. The person behind the specimen became visible again. Today, when you visit a modern anatomical museum, you'll notice a different atmosphere. The sensationalism is gone, the freak show element is absent. Instead, you'll find thoughtful exhibits that balance education with respect. You'll see specimens displayed not as curiosities, but as examples of human biological variation. Labels will tell you not just what the specimen shows, but, when known, something about the person it came from, their age, their story, sometimes even their name. It's a delicate balance. This work of preserving human remains for education. Like tending a garden with both beautiful flowers and memorial stones. The flowers, the scientific knowledge, the medical advancement are important. But the stones, the dignity of the individuals, their stories, their humanity, are important too. A good anatomical museum tends both, and so these collections, which began as cabinets of curiosity and evolved into formal medical institutions, continue to evolve. They remind us that the history of anatomy isn't just a history of scientific discovery. It's also a history of ethical awakening. It's the story of how we learned to see the humanity in the specimen, the person in the pathology, the individual behind the interesting case. As medical understanding advanced, so too did changing perspectives on the humanity and dignity of those with anatomical variations. And with that changing perspective came new conversations about how society itself should view difference. As we drift through the story of anatomical curiosities, we come to a quiet turning point. A moment when the study of human difference began to shift from mere observation towards something deeper. If the early approach to extraordinary anatomies was like collecting seashells on a beach, admiring their beauty without thinking of their origin, then the journey toward modern medical ethics was like learning to walk on that same beach during low tide, when the receding water reveals the living creatures within those shells. We began to see not just the form, but the life that animated it. This journey from curiosity to compassion began quietly, in the silent spaces between what was done to people and what was done for people. For much of medical history, those with anatomical differences existed in a peculiar space. They were simultaneously patients and specimens, subjects and objects. Their bodies were scrutinized, measured, displayed, sometimes celebrated, but rarely consulted. The story of how this changed is not a single dramatic event, but rather a gentle tide of realizations that washed over medicine and society, leaving both forever changed. One might imagine the early relationship between medicine and anatomical variation as something like a gardener who carefully tends rare and unusual plants, but never asks the plants what they need to thrive. The focus was on classification, on understanding the mechanics of difference, on fitting these variations into established systems of knowledge. What was missing was the gardener's consideration of whether the unusual plant might prefer a different kind of soil or more sunlight, or perhaps simply to be left to grow in its own way. And then something remarkable began to happen. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, we started hearing whispers, not from doctors, but from the subjects themselves. People like Charles Stratton, better known as General Tom Thumb, began asserting control over their own narratives. They negotiated their contracts, managed their publicity, and demonstrated that their extraordinary bodies contained ordinary human beings with agency and dignity. This wasn't yet formal medical ethics, but it was something equally important, a quiet revolution in how extraordinary bodies were perceived by the world. This shift toward respecting agency was like watching a stream gradually carve a new path through stone, slow at first, barely noticeable, but over time creating an entirely new channel. The first ripples of formal medical ethics began appearing in the late 19th century with declarations about the appropriate treatment of patients, but it would take nearly another century for these ideas to fully blossom. The turning point, though it came from a place of unimaginable darkness, was the Nuremberg Code of 1947, created in response to the horrific medical experiments of the Nazi regime. This document established for the first time in international law that voluntary consent was absolutely essential for human experimentation. Think of it as a kind of moral compass that medicine had been missing, a true north that pointed toward respect for human dignity above all else. The code stated clearly that participants must have the legal capacity to give consent, that they must be free from coercion, and that they must have sufficient knowledge to make an informed decision. Yet, the journey from written principles to lived practice has been its own gentle evolution. In the decades following Nuremberg, medicine learned that consent wasn't simply a signature on a form, it was a conversation. It was understanding. It was making sure that people truly comprehended what they were agreeing to, especially when they came from positions of less power or understanding. This was particularly important for those with anatomical variations who had historically been viewed through a lens of difference rather than dignity. the stories of people with extraordinary anatomies began to change in profound ways. No longer were they simply case studies in medical journals. They became collaborators in their own care. They transitioned from being the subject of the sentence to being the author of it. Take, for instance, the story of conjoined twins who, in more recent decades, have been consulted about separation surgery rather than simply being scheduled for procedures. Their voices, their preferences, their understanding of what it means to be connected to another human being, these became essential considerations. This shift reflects something beautiful about how our understanding of humanity expands over time. It's like learning to read a new kind of poetry. At first, you only see the individual words, but with time you begin to appreciate the spaces between them, the rhythm, the meaning that emerges from what isn't said as much as from what is. Medicine began to see that anatomical differences weren't just biological facts to be catalogued, but complex human experiences to be understood. In the 1960s and 70s, this ethical evolution continued with documents like the Declaration of Helsinki and the Belmont Report. These created frameworks for thinking about not just consent, but also beneficence, the principle that medical research should do good and justice, ensuring that the burdens and benefits of research were fairly distributed. For those with rare anatomical variations, this meant that their participation in medical studies couldn't be taken for granted simply because their bodies were unusual. Their humanity came first. And then came a quieter but equally important development, the rise of patient advocacy and support groups. People with anatomical differences began finding each other, sharing their experiences, and advocating for their needs. This was medicine listening not just to individual voices, but to collective wisdom. It was like hearing a choir where each voice represented a different experience, but together they created something harmonious and powerful. Today, when we look at how medicine approaches anatomical variations, we see the beautiful result of this ethical journey. Rare genetic conditions are studied with not just scientific curiosity, but with compassionate understanding. Surgeries to address anatomical differences consider not just what can be done, but what should be done, balancing medical possibilities with quality of life and personal choice. And perhaps most beautifully, medical education now often includes perspectives from patients themselves, teaching future doctors that everybody comes with a story that deserves to be heard. But this journey isn't finished. Medical ethics continues to evolve, just as our understanding of what it means to be human continues to deepen. New technologies present new questions. Genetic testing, fetal surgery, enhancements that blur the line between treatment and transformation. Each innovation requires us to revisit those fundamental questions. Who decides what should be done? How do we balance benefit and risk? And most importantly, how do we ensure that every person, regardless of how their body differs from some imagined norm, is treated with the dignity they deserve? What's remarkable about this ethical evolution is that it mirrors a broader change in how we as a society view difference itself. The shift from seeing anatomical variations as curiosities to seeing them as part of the beautiful diversity of human experience didn't just happen in clinics and research institutions. It happened in our families, our communities, our laws, and our hearts. It was a quiet revolution of recognizing that everybody tells a story, and that these stories deserve to be told by their owners, not just observed by others. And so, as we leave behind the formal structures of medical ethics, we find ourselves moving towards something more subtle and beautiful, the artistic imagination that has long been captivated by these same anatomical wonders. A realm where curiosity meets creativity, and where the human body becomes not just a subject of study, but a source of inspiration that has stirred the creative spirit across centuries and cultures. Now, as we consider the quiet stories of individual lives with anatomical variations, we find that these stories reveal much about both human uniqueness and shared humanity. And perhaps one of the most revealing ways to understand how societies have perceived difference is through the art they create. So let's gently explore how anatomical variations have been represented in art across centuries, from medieval grotesques to Renaissance studies to modern respectful portrayals. Imagine, if you will, a quiet gallery of the mind, where we can wander from room to room, from era to era, looking at how artists have seen and represented those with unusual bodies. The first room we might enter would be the medieval hall, filled with illuminated manuscripts, carvings on cathedrals, and tapestries. Here, you'll often find what art historians call grotesques, those strange, often humorous figures carved on the margins of sacred spaces, on the edges of manuscripts, sometimes in the very capitals of columns. These figures often have exaggerated features, immense noses, strangely formed limbs, bodies that seem to be part human, part something else. In many ways, these representations served as reminders of human imperfection, contrasts to the divine perfection being celebrated in the main art of the time. They were cautionary tales, sometimes moral warnings. But interestingly, they weren't always cruel. Some had a playfulness to them, a recognition that the world contains wonders of all kinds. Think of these grotesques as the medieval equivalent of a nature documentary showing unusual creatures. The artists were documenting the full range of what they observed in humanity, just as they documented all the strange animals they'd heard about but never seen. Unicorns, dragons, creatures with human heads on animal bodies. In this worldview, the unusual human body was part of a larger tapestry of natural wonders, part of God's diverse creation. As we move into the Renaissance, something fascinating happens. Artists begin to look more carefully, more scientifically. You can see this shift in Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical drawings, those exquisite studies of muscles, bones, organs. The Renaissance brought a new curiosity about how the body actually works, about its mechanics, its proportions. And this curiosity extended to unusual bodies as well. Consider the portraits of court dwarfs painted during this period. These were often people with achondroplasia who served in royal courts across Europe. In some paintings, they're shown with a certain dignity as members of the court household. In Velázquez's famous paintings of Spanish court dwarfs, for instance, there's a remarkable humanism. He paints them with the same careful attention he gives to the king or queen, the same quality of light on fabric, the same psychological presence in the eyes. They're individuals, not just types. It's as if the Renaissance eye was like a magnifying glass that could focus on both the ideal beauty of classical sculpture and the particular beauty of an individual face, an individual body. The perfect proportions of a Greek statue and the particular proportions of a court dwarf both deserved careful observation. Then we come to the Enlightenment and the age of scientific curiosity that followed. Here, anatomical variations began to be documented in medical texts, in natural history collections. Artists were often employed to create detailed illustrations for these studies. Some of these images are remarkably neutral, simply documenting what was observed. Others carry the biases of their time, seeing unusual bodies as medical curiosities rather than human individuals. Imagine these scientific illustrations as being like botanical drawings of rare plants. The artist aims for accuracy, for detail, but sometimes misses the living quality of the subject. The drawing might show every vein on a leaf perfectly, but not the way the leaf moves in the wind. So too with these medical illustrations, they might show the exact form of a body, but not the person who inhabits that body. As the 19th century unfolds, we see another shift. Photography arrives, and with it comes a new way of documenting human variation. But early photography often continued the tradition of medical curiosity. People with unusual bodies were photographed for medical studies, for sideshow advertisements, sometimes as specimens rather than as people. Yet even here, if you look closely at some of these early photographs, you can sometimes see the humanity breaking through, a certain expression in the eyes, a particular way of holding the body that speaks of personality, not just anatomy. It's like looking at very old family photographs where everyone is posed formally, stiffly. But if you study the faces long enough, you begin to see little cracks in the formality, a slight smile, a particular tilt of the head that reveals the person behind the pose. In the 20th century, something beautiful begins to happen in art's relationship with anatomical variation. Artists start to explore difference not as curiosity, not as medical specimen, but as part of the human experience. Diane Arbus's controversial photographs of people on the margins of society, for instance, are complex, sometimes criticized, sometimes praised for their raw humanity. What's interesting is that Arbus was trying to look directly at what society usually looks away from. Then there are artists who themselves have anatomical variations, creating art about their own experiences. Chuck Close, the photographer famous for his giant portraits, worked from a wheelchair after a spinal artery collapse left him paralyzed. His art became a meditation on how we see faces, how we construct identity from fragments. His portraits are like maps of human faces, showing every pore, every wrinkle, every particularity. Or consider the work of contemporary artists who explore disability and difference in ways that are neither pitying nor sensational. Their work asks questions about what is normal, what is beautiful, how we define ability. Some of this art is quietly revolutionary because it doesn't ask for sympathy, it asks for a different way of seeing. It's as if art has been learning over centuries how to look. First with a kind of symbolic shorthand, the grotesque representing imperfection. Then with scientific curiosity, the medical illustration documenting variation. Then with humanist attention, the portrait seeking the individual within the unusual body. And finally, with what we might call participatory vision, art made by those with variations, expressing their own experience in their own voice. This artistic journey reflects a larger cultural journey in how we perceive difference. When art shows someone with an unusual body only as a symbol of sin, of imperfection, of curiosity, that shapes how society sees real people with similar bodies, when art begins to show them as individuals with inner lives, with dignity, that too shapes perception. The quiet power of a respectful portrait is something like the power of a well-told story. When we see a painting or photograph that shows someone with an anatomical variation simply as a person, thinking, feeling, being, it creates a bridge of understanding. We're no longer looking at other, we're looking at another human being with all the complexity that entails. Modern art has also begun to play with the very idea of the normal body. Performance artists use their bodies to challenge our assumptions. Sculptors create figures with proportions that defy classical ideals. Photographers create images that celebrate bodies of all kinds. This isn't about making everything the same. It's about expanding what we consider to be worthy of artistic attention, worthy of being seen as beautiful. Think of it this way: if the classical ideal of beauty is like a single perfect note held for a long time, then the modern appreciation of diverse bodies is like a chord, many different notes sounding together, creating something richer, more complex, more interesting than any single note could be alone. In our own time, we're surrounded by images in advertising, in film, in social media. Most of these images still present a very narrow range of what bodies should look like. But there are artists working against this narrowness, creating images that include bodies we don't usually see in mainstream media. Their work is quietly changing what we consider beautiful, what we consider normal. This artistic representation matters because art doesn't just reflect how we see, it teaches us how to see. Every painting, every photograph, every sculpture is giving us lessons in attention. It's saying, look here. Notice this. Consider this worthy of your gaze. When art includes bodies with anatomical variations as subjects rather than objects, as individuals rather than types, it's teaching us to see people with those variations in the same way. So as we leave this quiet gallery of the mind with its medieval grotesques, its Renaissance portraits, its modern explorations, we might carry with us this thought. The history of art's representation of anatomical variation is a history of learning how to look with more humanity, with more curiosity, with more respect. It's a slow, centuries-long education in seeing the particular beauty in every particular body. And as we move from how societies have represented difference in art to how individuals have lived with difference in their daily lives, we begin to understand that every unusual body contains a typical human story. You know, as we think about the gentle history of human variation, Thomas Wadhouse naturally brings to mind others who lived in different times, under different circumstances, but who shared that experience of being remarkable to the human eye. Their stories are not footnotes to medical history, but rather chapters in our understanding of the human body, and perhaps more importantly, in our understanding of human compassion. Let's turn our thoughts now to Julia Pastrana, who was born in Mexico in 1834. History remembers her as the woman with hypertrichosis, excessive hair growth covering her face and body, and gingival hyperplasia, which gave her a distinctive jawline and set of teeth. But she was also a singer and dancer, fluent in Spanish and English, and she sang with a lovely voice. She was, by all accounts, a bright and talented human being. Yet during most of her adult life, she was exhibited as a curiosity. She was paraded across the United States and Europe, sometimes billed as the baboon lady, a term that completely stripped her of her humanity. She became a commodity, a spectacle. And even in death, her treatment was profoundly disturbing. When she died in childbirth in 1860, her husband had both her body and that of her newborn son preserved and continued to exhibit them for years after. For over a century, Julia Pastrana's story was primarily one of exploitation, a dark example of how curiosity can curdle into cruelty when it lacks empathy. But in the last few decades, something quietly remarkable has happened. Julia's story has been reclaimed, not as a medical oddity, but as a human story. There have been plays, books, and artworks created in her honor. And perhaps most poignantly, a long campaign was waged to have her remains returned to her homeland for a proper burial. This finally happened in 2013, over 150 years after her death. Her body was laid to rest in Sinaloa, Mexico. There is a profound gentleness in that act of repatriation, a quiet final chapter of dignity. Julia's anatomy taught medical science about the conditions she lived with, but her life and legacy teach us something else. They teach us about time, about how history can sometimes revise itself, and about how the story of a person, no matter how long ago they lived, is never truly finished. It can be revisited, reconsidered, and given the respect it was always due. Then, moving through the gentle currents of time, we come to a man whose name became synonymous with the struggle for dignity in the face of profound difference. Joseph Carey Merrick, known to history as the Elephant Man. Born in Leicester, England in 1862, Joseph developed severe physical deformities that dramatically altered his appearance during his childhood. His skull grew massive and misshapen, with overgrown bone and thickened, rough skin. The condition was long thought to be neurofibromatosis, though more recent theories suggest it might have been Proteus syndrome. But to list the medical terms is to miss the heart of the story, just as looking at the photographs of the time can miss the person within. For many years, Joseph Merrick's life echoed that of Julia Pastrana. He was exhibited in freak shows, a source of horror and fascination for paying customers. He was, in his own heartbreaking words, an object of ridicule and exposed to the ruthless gaze of the careless crowd. But his story contains a pivotal turn, a ray of gentle humanity that pierces the gloom. In 1886, he was rescued from this life by Dr. Frederick Treves, a surgeon at the London hospital. Treves did not initially see Merrick as a medical case, but as a man in desperate need. He arranged for Joseph to have a permanent home in a secluded apartment at the hospital. There, Joseph Merrick found something he had never truly known: safety, privacy, and friendship. He read books, built beautiful models out of card, and corresponded with people who visited him. He was discovered to be highly intelligent, sensitive, and articulate. The change in his circumstances wasn't a medical cure. There was none to be had, but it was a cure for the isolation and cruelty he had endured. Treves and the hospital staff gave him the simple, profound gift of seeing him as a person. Joseph Merrick died in his sleep in 1890 at the age of 27. His death was peaceful, a stark contrast to the turbulence of his earlier life. His story, perhaps more than any other, has become a touchstone for discussions of empathy and medical ethics. He reminds us that behind every complex medical condition is a conscious, feeling human being with hopes, fears, and a deep need to be understood. His gentle presence in that quiet hospital room taught the world a lesson that his time in the sideshow never could: that dignity is the most essential treatment of all. As we drift through this history, we might think of these individuals as islands in a vast human sea, each with their own unique topography. And there are other islands, their names perhaps less known, but their stories equally woven into this soft tapestry of human variation. there was Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins, born in Siam, now Thailand, in 1811. They were physically connected at the chest by a band of tissue and cartilage. They were exhibited around the world, but unlike many others, they eventually took control of their own lives and careers. They married sisters, fathered 21 children between them, and became successful farmers in North Carolina. Their lives demonstrated with quiet force that difference does not preclude a full and autonomous life. They lived connected for all of their 63 years, and their condition gave surgeons and physicians the first real, living insight into the complex shared physiology of conjoined twins, knowledge that would later help separate other twins in life-saving operations. Or consider Frances O'Connor, born in Ireland in 1894. She was known as the human pincushion for her apparent ability to push pins and needles into her body without feeling pain or bleeding. She toured for years, a gentle enigma. Modern medicine would eventually diagnose her with a condition known as congenital insensitivity to pain, a rare neurological disorder where the body cannot perceive pain signals. Her life, while seemingly a spectacle, became an unwitting case study in one of our body's most misunderstood and vital alarm systems. And then there was Arthur Boyd, the man who famously taught himself to swallow swords in the late 19th century. While not a condition of birth, his lifelong practice of this dangerous feat pushed the known boundaries of human anatomy. Doctors of the time were baffled by how he could survive it. By repeatedly swallowing and retrieving blades without injury, he inadvertently provided a living map of the human esophagus and stomach, demonstrating their surprising flexibility and resilience in a way that no textbook illustration ever could. These gentle histories, when gathered together, form a quiet but powerful narrative. They show us that while early medicine often approached uniqueness with a mix of fascination and fear, viewing people primarily as specimens or spectacles, these very individuals were the agents of their own lessons. They were, in a sense, the first teachers. Julia Pastrana taught us about hypertrichosis. Joseph Merrick taught us about profound skeletal deformities and, more importantly, about human dignity. Chang and Eng taught us about conjoined physiology. Frances O'Connor taught us about the nervous system's complexity. They were walking, breathing libraries of medical knowledge long before science had the language or the ethics to properly study them. Their lives, often marked by hardship, nonetheless illuminated the dark corners of human biology, and in doing so they forced society, slowly, fitfully, but surely to confront its own prejudices. They made the extraordinary visible, and in that visibility they began to change what was considered ordinary. They expanded the map of what it means to be human. Their treatment, however, remains a sobering counterpoint, a dark thread running through this gentle history. The history of anatomical curiosity is also a history of exploitation. For centuries, the line between scientific inquiry and public spectacle was blurry, often non-existent. People were placed in cabinets of curiosity, displayed in dime museums, and paraded in traveling shows. Their humanity was often secondary to their novelty. This era, which we now view with discomfort, serves as an essential moral landmark. It shows us how far we have come in our ethical understanding. It reminds us that knowledge gained without consent or compassion is knowledge tainted. It teaches us that the subject of study must always be treated as a person first, a patient second, and a curiosity never. This evolution in thought is, in many ways, the most important medical discovery to come from these stories, the discovery of medical ethics itself. It is the quiet understanding that to study the human form is to engage with the human life, and that requires a framework of respect, consent, and care. Their difficult lives paved the way for the principles that now govern modern medicine, ensuring that the pursuit of knowledge never again comes at the cost of human dignity. So, as we let these gentle histories settle in our minds, we can feel a quiet shift occurring. The era of the public spectacle has faded. The language of freaks and monsters has been replaced by the language of genetics, syndromes, and personalized care. Modern medicine, with all its technology and specialized knowledge, has transformed our understanding of these anatomical variations from mysteries to be gawked at into conditions to be understood and managed with both scientific clarity and profound ethical responsibility. And that transformation, that is a story for the next quiet chapter. As we look back on the long history of anatomical curiosity, from the gentle fascination with Thomas Wadhouse to the clinical examinations of medical institutions, we find ourselves arriving at our own contemporary moment. We stand now at an interesting threshold, a place where our understanding of anatomical variation has been transformed by scientific insights that would have seemed like pure magic to earlier generations. Yet we still grapple with many of the same fundamental human questions about difference, dignity, and the meaning of normality. Our modern medical understanding of anatomical variation begins perhaps with the most fundamental level of human existence, our genes. Think of DNA as an enormous library, with genes serving as the books and nucleotides as the letters on the pages. Each of us carries about 20,000 of these genetic books in our personal library. Now, imagine that across all humanity, there are about 3 million tiny differences, single changed letters in the genetic text that makes us who we are. Most of these differences don't change the meaning of the story in significant ways, but occasionally, a few changed letters in just the right place can lead to variations in how our bodies develop. Some of these genetic differences create the beautiful diversity we see in human faces, body types, and other visible traits. Others might lead to what medicine calls congenital anomalies, variations in anatomy that are present from birth. What's fascinating about modern genetics is that it has shown us that many of these anatomical variations exist not as simple yes or no conditions, but as part of a spectrum. It's not like a light switch that's either on or off, but more like a dimmer switch that can be adjusted to different levels, or perhaps like paint colors that blend into one another gradually across the color wheel. This spectrum concept has been profoundly important in helping us understand that bodies exist along continuums rather than in rigid boxes labeled normal and abnormal. When medicine encounters these variations today, it approaches them with a fascinating dual perspective. On one hand, there's the purely anatomical and functional assessment. How does this variation affect health? Does it cause pain? Does it interfere with breathing, eating, moving, or other essential functions? Does it create vulnerability to infection or other medical complications? These are questions about the practical experience of living in a particular body, and modern medicine has developed remarkable tools to address them when intervention is desired or necessary. On the other hand, contemporary medicine has increasingly recognized what might be called the phenomenological aspect, the lived experience of embodiment. How does this variation shape a person's relationship with their own body? How does it affect their interaction with the world? What psychological and social dimensions accompany the physical reality? This recognition has transformed many medical encounters from purely technical exchanges into more holistic conversations. Surgical interventions today, when pursued, follow what we might think of as three guiding principles that have evolved over time. First, there's the principle of functionality. Surgery should aim to improve how the body works. Second, there's the principle of symptom relief. Surgery should aim to reduce pain or discomfort. And third, there's what's become known as the principle of enhancement, the idea that surgery might also aim to improve appearance or social functioning. But here's where things become ethically complex. Who defines what constitutes improvement? Who determines what range of appearances is socially acceptable? And whose desires are we privileging, the individuals, their families, or society's expectations? Consider an example that bridges the historical and the contemporary. If someone like Thomas Wadhouse were born today with his unusually large head, medical science would first try to understand the underlying cause through genetic testing and imaging. It would check whether this variation came with any functional challenges, perhaps difficulties with balance or vision or neck support. And then, crucially, medicine would ask, what does this individual desire? What quality of life are they experiencing? Is there suffering that could be alleviated? The answers to these questions would guide whether any intervention was considered, and what form that intervention might take. This approach represents a remarkable evolution from the way anatomical variations were treated even a century ago. In earlier eras, the primary concern was often about fitting a narrow definition of normality. Today, there's more emphasis on individual autonomy, functional outcomes, and psychological well-being. Yet we must acknowledge that this shift isn't complete or universal. Social pressures still exist. The desire to normalize still exerts a powerful influence, sometimes explicitly, sometimes in more subtle ways. What makes our current moment particularly interesting is that we're developing technologies that allow us to intervene earlier and more precisely than ever before. Fetal medicine now sometimes detects anatomical variations before birth, raising profound questions about when and whether to consider interventions. Gene therapies are emerging that might one day allow us to modify the expression of certain traits. These advances force us to confront difficult ethical questions. At what point does treatment become enhancement? Where do we draw the line between embracing human diversity and preventing suffering? And who gets to draw that line? Meanwhile, representation in modern medicine has also evolved. Medical textbooks, once filled with idealized and standardized images, now increasingly include photographs showing normal variation. Medical training programs now often include sessions on diversity and inclusion. There's a growing recognition that the average patient doesn't exist, that every clinic day brings dozens of variations on human anatomy, and that understanding this range is crucial to providing good care. Yet challenges persist. Medical terminology itself can carry weight. Words like deformity, defect, and abnormality have powerful negative connotations that can shape both medical thinking and patient experience. There's been a slow but important shift toward more neutral language like variation, difference, or condition. This linguistic shift reflects a deeper philosophical change, a recognition that value judgments shouldn't be embedded in diagnostic labels. In our media-saturated world, representations of anatomical variations still tend toward extremes. On one end, we have sensationalized portrayals that play into curiosity or fear. On the other, we have inspirational stories that sometimes flatten complex human experiences into simple narratives of triumph or tragedy. Both extremes miss the ordinary, everyday reality that most people with anatomical variations experience, the reality of going to work, having relationships, pursuing hobbies, living lives that are neither defined by their differences nor untouched by them. Perhaps the most important insight from contemporary genetics and medicine is this: variation isn't an exception to the human condition. It is the human condition. Our DNA is inherently variable. Our bodies develop in slightly different ways. Our faces, our limbs, our organs, they all exist in countless variations. Some of these variations are immediately visible, others are hidden. Some affect function, others are purely aesthetic. Some are noticed by every stranger on the street. Others are known only to ourselves and our closest intimates. Medical science has given us tools to understand this variation at levels our ancestors couldn't have imagined. We can sequence genomes, create detailed three-dimensional images of body structures, perform microsurgeries that would have seemed like science fiction just decades ago. But these tools haven't answered the fundamental human questions about difference. They've just given us new contexts in which to ask them. As we continue to develop medical technologies that give us more control over our bodies and their variations, we'll need to develop ethical frameworks that are equally sophisticated. We'll need to balance the genuine desire to alleviate suffering with respect for human diversity. We'll need to listen carefully to the people who actually live in these varied bodies, rather than making assumptions about what their experiences must be like. And we'll need to remember that medical intervention is always a choice, one of many possible responses to human difference. Our journey from cabinets of curiosity to genetic sequencing has been long and winding. What remains constant is the human fascination with variation itself, the endless permutations of form that nature produces, and our evolving relationship with these differences. As medical science continues to advance, offering both new possibilities and new dilemmas, perhaps the most important wisdom we've gained is simply this: understanding how bodies work doesn't necessarily tell us how to live well in them. That question, how to live well in the particular bodies we have, remains one that each generation and each person must answer for themselves. And as we consider these questions of medicine, ethics, and human difference, we might wonder how these abstract discussions translate into the concrete experiences of individuals living today with the same kinds of anatomical variations that once fascinated collectors and audiences. But that is a story for another time. As we bring our journey through Anatomical Curiosities to a gentle close, I'd like to invite you to consider how the stories we've been exploring, those of Thomas Wadhouse, the giants and little people of the past, and all those who lived with unusual anatomies, resonate in our contemporary world. How does our historical fascination with difference inform the way we understand human diversity today? What might Thomas Wadhouse and his contemporaries teach us about embracing the beautiful, complex tapestry of what it means to be human? Let's begin by reflecting on something fundamental. For most of human history, physical difference was understood through a particular lens, one that saw variations primarily as curiosities, marvels, or medical conditions to be explained. The world Thomas Wadhouse inhabited was one where his extraordinary height would have placed him squarely in the realm of the spectacle, something to be exhibited, wondered at, perhaps even feared. The medical science of his day, still emerging from Renaissance theories of humors and balances, would have struggled to explain him, falling back on ideas about giantism as a kind of aberration from normal human form. What's interesting, though, is how this way of thinking, what scholars now call the medical model of understanding difference, persisted long after Thomas's time and continues to shape our attitudes today in subtle and sometimes problematic ways. Imagine, if you will, a garden where only one kind of flower is considered the ideal. Every other blossom, slightly different in color, size, or shape, is seen as something that needs fixing, something that has strayed from the perfect template. That's essentially what the medical model of disability or difference suggests, that variations from what's considered normal are primarily medical problems requiring medical solutions. This perspective, while often born from genuine desire to help and heal, can sometimes reduce the richness of human experience to a checklist of symptoms, viewing difference primarily as deficiency. It's a perspective that focuses on what someone can't do according to standard measures, rather than celebrating what unique capacities and perspectives they might bring to the world. But alongside this medical understanding, another way of thinking has been quietly growing, like a different kind of garden altogether. This perspective, often called the social model, suggests that disability or difference isn't primarily about the body itself, but about how society is organized. Think of it this way: if everyone in a community suddenly lost their eyesight, would blindness be considered a disability? Or would that society naturally develop ways of communicating, navigating, and creating that work perfectly well without sight? The social model suggests that many of the challenges faced by people with disabilities or differences come not from their bodies themselves, but from a world designed for only one narrow range of human variation. Steps without ramps, information only in written form, spaces that assume everyone can hear, see, or move in exactly the same way. These are social barriers, not inherent limitations of the people who encounter them. When we look back at historical figures like Thomas Wadhouse through this dual lens, something interesting happens. We can appreciate how the medical understanding of his time sought to explain his remarkable stature, perhaps with ideas about humors or glandular functions that we now know were incomplete. But we can also imagine how the social world of 18th century Europe, with its low ceilings, small doorways, and clothing made for average-sized bodies, must have presented daily challenges that had nothing to do with Thomas's body itself and everything to do with how his world was built. The curiosity he inspired wasn't just about his height. It was about encountering someone who didn't fit the physical template around which society had been constructed. This brings us to perhaps the most important reflection of all, that our understanding of difference is never just about biology. It's always also about culture, about values, about what a society considers normal, desirable, or problematic. Consider how attitudes toward height have shifted over time. In Thomas Wadhouse's day, extreme height was often associated with brute strength or simple curiosity. In our own time, we've seen height become associated with success in certain fields: leadership, basketball, modeling, while also recognizing medical conditions like gigantism that require compassionate care. The physical reality of being tall hasn't changed, but the meanings we attach to that reality have transformed dramatically. This cultural dimension becomes even clearer when we consider how different societies have understood anatomical variations across history. In some cultures, people with certain physical differences were considered specially blessed, holding spiritual or leadership roles. In others, the same variations might have been feared or stigmatized. Some Native American tribes, for instance, held individuals with dwarfism in particular regard, sometimes as spiritual intermediaries. In medieval Europe, the same condition might lead someone to become a court jester, a position of both privilege and mockery. What these varying responses tell us is that difference itself is neutral. It's the cultural stories we tell about difference that shape how people experience their lives. As we've moved through the 20th and into the 21st century, another shift has been occurring, one that brings us closer to understanding not just difference, but diversity as a fundamental strength of our species. Think about biodiversity in a forest. A forest with only one type of tree is vulnerable. One disease, one pest, one change in climate could wipe it out. But a forest with many different species, each adapted to slightly different conditions, is resilient. It can withstand challenges, adapt to change, and continue thriving. Human cognitive and physical diversity might function in a similar way. Different ways of thinking, different ways of perceiving the world, different ways of moving through space. These aren't flaws in our species' design, but rather our collective toolkit for survival and innovation. The neurodiversity movement has helped us understand this in relation to cognitive differences like autism or ADHD. Rather than viewing these solely as disorders to be treated, this perspective recognizes that different neurological configurations bring different strengths, pattern recognition, intense focus, creative problem solving that have been valuable throughout human history. In a similar vein, the disability rights movement has shifted our understanding from pity or charity toward rights, access, and inclusion. This isn't about ignoring medical realities or the very real challenges some differences can present. It's about recognizing that those challenges are often magnified by how society is structured, and that the solutions lie not in fixing individuals, but in creating a world with space for more ways of being. Now you might be wondering, what does all this have to do with historical figures like Thomas Wadhouse or the anatomical curiosities of centuries past? I would suggest that these historical stories are like mirrors, reflecting back to us our own assumptions about normality, beauty, and human worth. When we look at how people with unusual anatomies were exhibited in fairs and courts, we're seeing not just curiosity about physical form, but cultural anxiety about where the boundaries of human lie. When we read about how medical texts attempted to categorize and explain variations, we're witnessing the birth of scientific approaches that still influence how we think about bodies today. But perhaps most importantly, these historical figures remind us of something fundamental that sometimes gets lost in our abstract discussions of models and theories: the quiet dignity of individual lives. Behind every medical description, every carnival exhibition, every historical record, there was a person. Someone who woke up each morning, formed relationships, experienced joy and sorrow, and navigated a world that often saw them first as a curiosity rather than a complete human being. Thomas Wadhouse wasn't just the giant, he was a man who lived a life, who probably had favorite foods and disliked certain weather, who formed friendships and experienced the full range of human emotion within his remarkable body. This brings us to a place of gentle paradox as we conclude our exploration. The more we learn about human variation, through history, through medicine, through personal stories, the more we realize how inadequate our categories often are. We develop medical models and social models. We create classifications and diagnoses. We build ramps and write accessibility guidelines. All of these are important, necessary steps toward creating a more inclusive world. But ultimately, they're tools for understanding something that exists beyond tools, the irreducible complexity and dignity of each human life. In our contemporary world where difference is sometimes feared, sometimes celebrated, and often misunderstood, perhaps what we need most is the wisdom to hold multiple truths at once. To recognize that medical understanding can bring relief and healing, while also acknowledging that medical categories can never capture the fullness of human experience. To appreciate that creating accessible spaces is both a practical necessity and a moral imperative, while also remembering that accessibility isn't just about physical adaptations, but about cultivating openness to different ways of being in the world. To celebrate human diversity as a source of strength, while also honoring the very real challenges that difference can bring into individual lives. As we prepare to leave the quiet contemplation of anatomical curiosities behind, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. The history we've been exploring isn't just about unusual bodies. It's about what happens when human beings encounter what seems strange, different, or unfamiliar. In every era, people have looked at those who were physically different and asked themselves questions. What makes us human? Where do we draw the line between normal and abnormal? How do we treat those who don't fit our expectations? These are questions that Thomas Wadhouse and his contemporaries might have understood in their own way, filtered through the knowledge and assumptions of their time. They are questions that continue to resonate in our own era as we navigate increasingly complex conversations about difference, identity, and inclusion. And perhaps, in the quiet space between historical curiosity and contemporary understanding, we might find something unexpected. Not answers to these difficult questions, but the wisdom to live with them more gently, more compassionately, with more room for the beautiful varied tapestry of what it means to be human. So as we let these reflections settle into the calm space we've created together, remember that every body has a story, every variation has a history. And in learning about those stories, whether they belong to an 18th century giant or someone living with difference today, we're not just cataloging curiosities, we're slowly, gently learning to see the world through wider eyes and to make space for more ways of being human in this world we share. And so we arrive here, at the quiet conclusion of our journey through the gentle history of human variation. As we leave behind the particular contours of Thomas Wadhouse's remarkable life, and the other lives we've touched upon, what remains is something more diffuse, more profound, a quiet understanding that settles like dust motes in a shaft of afternoon light. These stories of anatomical difference were never really about monsters or marvels, not in the way we might first imagine. Rather, they are stories about how we construct meaning from what we do not immediately recognize as ourselves. They are stories about the space between what is and what we believe should be. Think of the human body as a landscape. Most of us travel through familiar valleys, along well-worn ridges, beneath skies that feel like home. But sometimes the topography shifts. A mountain appears where we expected a plain. A river carves a new channel through the earth. The variations in our forms are just subtle changes in this terrain, unique patterns of peaks and valleys, bends and folds. In past centuries, when someone encountered a variation they had never seen before, they might have labeled it a wonder of the world or a devilish omen. They were simply early cartographers, trying to draw the first hesitant maps of uncharted territory using the only language they knew. The quiet dignity we can now afford to people like Thomas Wadhouse, and to the countless unnamed others whose forms diverged from the common path, comes from this change in perspective. We have learned, slowly and often painfully, that a body is not a mistake to be corrected. It is not a riddle to be solved. It is simply a place where someone lives, a unique intersection of genes and circumstance, a singular arrangement of bone and sinew, nerve and tissue. When we look at historical accounts of people who were exhibited, studied, or whispered about, we are witnessing humanity's long, halting journey toward understanding itself. Medical ethics, as we understand it today, is built upon the wreckage of past mistakes. The idea that a human being's consent matters, that their autonomy should be respected, that their body should not be treated as public property. These are relatively recent chapters in our collective story. They grew in the silent spaces between one unfair exhibition and another, between one exploitative doctor and the next. They grew because people began to see that the person behind the unusual feature was still a person, with desires and fears, with rights and dignity. The history of Anatomical Curiosities is, in many ways, the prehistory of medical ethics. It is the story of how we learned, inch by painful inch, where the boundaries of respect should be drawn. And what of the beauty in this diversity? It is a quiet beauty, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that reveals itself slowly, like the subtle variations in the grain of wood or the unique patterns of frost on a winter window. The sheer improbability of your particular existence with your specific combination of traits is a kind of miracle. You are not a generic template. You are a variation on a magnificent theme. And so was Thomas Wadhouse. And so is every person who has ever drawn a curious glance or raised an eyebrow for being different. When we drift off to sleep, our bodies settle into their most vulnerable state. We trust that the world will keep turning, that the air will keep filling our lungs, that our hearts will continue their steady rhythm. In this state of surrender, we are perhaps most aware of the simple fact of our embodiment, that we inhabit these fragile, temporary forms. It is a moment to remember that every body, no matter its configuration, is worthy of that same trust, that same peace. Every variation in the human family is just another way of being at home in the world. The history we've traced tonight is not a chronicle of freaks, but a gentle unfolding of human understanding. It shows us that curiosity, when paired with compassion, can lead us out of fear and into wonder, that the unknown, when approached with humility, becomes simply another facet of the human experience. The people who lived with notable variations were not here to teach us lessons, but in living their lives, they taught us anyway. They showed us the limits of our own imaginations, and they expanded those limits simply by existing as they were. So as you begin to drift, let your thoughts settle on this quiet truth. Human variation is not a problem to be solved. It is the very texture of our existence. It is the reason no two snowflakes are alike, and why no two heartbeats are perfectly synchronized. It is what makes each of us irreplaceable. The dignity we can now afford to people from history comes from recognizing that their worth was never conditional on their conformity. They were whole people, just as you are a whole person, just as every sleeping form in the world tonight is whole and complete. Let this be the gentle lesson that lingers as sleep approaches. We are all variations, we are all curiosities in our own subtle ways. And in that shared reality, there is a profound and beautiful equality. The world is richer for every variation it contains, for every unexpected twist in the human story. Rest now with the understanding that difference is not deviation. It is simply another note in the vast, complex, and beautiful symphony of being human. Let your breathing slow and carry this quiet dignity with you into dream.